The official term for a complete loss of situational awareness in aviation is lost SA. It's a pilot's worst nightmare, but there was no term for when the entire world loses it at the same time. My name is Alex, and from my tower of glass, I had a front row seat to the moment humanity went lost SA. This is how it began. My world was built of glass and sound, 300 feet above the earth, a concrete stalk holding a panoramic eye. From here, I saw the planet breathe. The morning rush, a pulsing artery of red taillights on the freeway. The first glint of sun off a wingtip as a transatlantic flight from London caught the dawn. The intricate, breathtakingly complex ballet of 1,000 moving parts that we call a Tuesday. My name is Alex, and for 12 years, my job, my entire professional existence was to impose order on chaos. I was an air traffic controller at a major international hub. My medium wasn't paint or clay. It was aluminum tubes filled with human beings, moving at 800 feet per second. In the tower, we have a saying, hours of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. It's not entirely true. The boredom is a myth. It's a state of hypervigilance, a low-frequency hum of immense responsibility. You learn to split your consciousness into a dozen different streams. One part of your brain is guiding a 777 onto the ILS for runway 25 right. Another is monitoring a ground controller's instruction to a line of taxiing A320s. Another is processing a weather update about a wind shear advisory. And yet another is subconsciously tracking the fuel load of a cargo plane in a holding pattern. You don't see people. You can't. If you think about the 300 souls on that flight from Frankfurt, the families, the lives, you'll freeze. You see call signs, Speedbird 284, Shamrock 105. You see data blocks on a screen, altitude, airspeed, heading. You are the rational human node in a global network of unimaginable complexity. You are the shepherd for a flock of metal sheep. My shift supervisor, Marcus, used to call it the Great Machine. Marcus was a 30-year veteran, a man who seemed to be carved from the same concrete as the tower itself. He saw the system, the whole beautiful, intricate, fragile thing, as a living organism. "We're just the brainstem, Alex," he'd say, nursing his third coffee of the morning. "We handle the autonomic functions. We keep it breathing. But don't ever forget how many other parts have to work perfectly for the thing to stay alive." He was right. For a single passenger to get from New York to Los Angeles, thousands of people, pilots, baggage handlers, mechanics, fuelers, dispatchers, security personnel, have to do their job perfectly. The machine was a miracle of cooperation, built on a foundation of trust and protocol. We all trusted that the pilot would follow the heading, that the mechanic had torqued the bolts correctly, that the fueler had provided clean kerosene. And for my entire career, that trust was rewarded. The machine worked, until the day it didn't. That Tuesday began like any other. The morning rush was tapering off. Marcus was overseeing 2 of our trainees. Ben, a kid barely 22, all raw talent and nervous energy, a little too eager to prove himself. And Chloe, quiet, methodical, her mind like a steel trap for regulations and procedures. She saw the patterns before anyone else. I was handling approach control, the airspace in a 40-mile radius around the airport. It was my job to sequence the arrivals, lining them up for final approach like beads on a string. The rhythm was familiar, comforting. The crackle of the frequency, the clipped, professional cadence of the pilots. It was the sound of normalcy, the sound of a world that worked, the sound of a world that had no idea it was already dead. The modern world is not a collection of independent states or systems. It is a single, globally integrated machine. We saw this with the 2008 financial crisis, how a failure in one obscure financial instrument could cascade and threaten the entire world economy. We see it with supply chain disruptions, where a single ship stuck in a canal can cause shortages thousands of miles away. This is the nature of a complex, just-in-time system. It is incredibly efficient, but its efficiency comes at the cost of resilience. There is no slack, no redundancy. Every component is critical. An airport is a perfect microcosm of this. It is a node where countless global systems converge: transportation, energy, security, communication, logistics. It is, therefore, both a vital organ of our civilization and an extraordinary point of vulnerability. In any systemic collapse scenario, these critical nodes are always the first to fail, and their failure accelerates the collapse of everything they are connected to. The irony is that the very things that make our world so miraculous are the same things that make it so profoundly fragile. The first stone The avalanche was small, so small it was almost imperceptible. It came from the ground control frequency, a frantic call from a baggage tug operator. "Ground, tug 7B, I've got a man on the taxiway, Alpha 7. He's just standing there, not responding." A nuisance, a security breach. I barely registered it, my focus on a convergence of two flight paths 15 miles out. Marcus handled it, his voice the epitome of calm authority, directing airport security to the location. 10 minutes later, another stone, this one a little larger. A call from a regional airport 200 miles east. The controller's voice was strained. "Center, be advised, we are closing our airspace. We have a situation on the ground." No further details, they just went silent. Strange, highly irregular. Chloe, ever diligent, logged the event and started cross-referencing news feeds for that area. She found nothing. Then came the NOTAM, a notice to airmen, a routine bulletin about runway closures or equipment. Power outages. This one was different. It came from a major hub in the Midwest, and it was written in panicked, non-standard language. "Airport closed. Uncontained biohazard. Stay clear. This is not a drill." It vanished from the system almost as quickly as it appeared, deleted by a higher authority. But Chloe had already screenshotted it. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight. Marcus stared at the screenshot, his brow furrowed. The carefully constructed placidity of our morning was beginning to crack. It was the feeling you get when you're working a complex problem and you realize one of your initial assumptions was wrong. The whole equation is off, but you don't know why yet. The pilots in the air knew nothing, of course. For them, it was still a perfect, clear Tuesday. But for us in the tower, the data points were starting to form a disturbing pattern. It felt like troubleshooting a ghost in the machine. A series of small, unrelated malfunctions that hinted at a much deeper, systemic failure. I remember looking out the window at the seamless flow of departures and arrivals and feeling a sudden, chilling sense of detachment. I was watching a beautiful, intricate clockwork mechanism, unaware that its mainspring had already snapped. It was still moving, but only on inertia, and it was about to fly apart. Normalcy bias is one of the most powerful and dangerous cognitive biases human beings possess. It is the tendency to believe that because something has never happened before, it never will. We underestimate the possibility of disaster and its potential effects. In the initial hours of any unprecedented crisis, the majority of people, even trained professionals, will attempt to fit what they are seeing into a pre-existing, non-threatening framework. A man on a taxiway is a drunk or a protester. A garbled transmission is an equipment malfunction. The first reports of violence are dismissed as riots or isolated criminal acts. This is a protective P. Psychological mechanism. The human mind struggles to accept a reality that is too far outside its frame of reference. This period of disbelief, of rationalization, is incredibly dangerous. It creates a window of inaction, a critical period when decisive measures could be taken, but aren't, because the majority of people simply cannot bring themselves to believe the evidence of their own eyes. They are waiting for an official announcement, for an authority figure to tell them how to interpret what they are seeing. But in a true systemic collapse, that authority is often one of the first casualties. The moment the world broke came from a queen. A Boeing 747-400, call sign Global Air Freight 88, on a 5-mile final for runway 25 left. A heavy, lumbering giant, one of the most reliable workhorses in the sky. The pilot, a captain I'd spoken to 100 times, was named Frank Miller. His voice was usually a gravelly, reassuring baritone, the kind of voice that made you feel like the plane was in good hands. This time, it was different. It wasn't the words themselves at first, it was the sound, the ragged intake of breath, the tremor he couldn't hide. Tower, Global 88, we're going around. A go-around at 5 miles on a clear day is unusual. But it was the reason that stopped my heart. I asked, Global 88, state intentions, say reason for go-around. The reply came after a long, static-filled pause. Frank's voice was a ragged whisper, pushed through clenched teeth. Tower, advise, there are people on the runway. They're attacking the landing lights. I keyed the mic, my own voice on autopilot, running the checklist. Global 88, understand, people on the runway. Maintain 3,000 feet, turn right heading 340. As I spoke, my other hand was grabbing the tower's high-powered binoculars. I focused them on the approach end of 25 left. My brain simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a prank. There were figures, maybe 20 or 30 of them, stumbling around the approach lights. Some were dressed in airport ground crew uniforms, others in civilian clothes. Their movements were wrong, jerky, uncoordinated, impossibly fast. As I watched, a security vehicle, lights flashing, sped towards them. 2 officers got out. The figures turned, and they swarmed the vehicle. It wasn't a fight. It was a feeding. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind was scrambling, trying to find a box to put this in, a protocol, a procedure. There was none. Ben was staring at me, his face pale. What is it? What's happening? Marcus was already on the crash phone to airport operations, his voice low and urgent. Then Frank's voice came over the speaker again, and this time, all professionalism was gone. It was pure, naked terror. Oh God, Tower, they're eating them. They're eating the ground crew. He wasn't talking to me anymore. He was talking to himself. He was a wit. Stillness, just like me. I looked through the binoculars again, just in time to see one of the figures, its face a mask of blood, look up. It was impossible, but it felt like it was looking right at me, right at the tower. And for the first time in my career, sitting in the safest place in the entire airport, I felt a primal, gut-wrenching fear. The chaos wasn't just on my screen anymore. It was outside my window. The machine hadn't just malfunctioned, it had grown teeth. What followed was a symphony of collapse, and I was the conductor. The frequency, once a controlled dialogue, became a waterfall of panic. A cargo plane captain, his voice cracking, reported a breach in the airport's northern perimeter fence, followed by screams that were cut off by a burst of static. A private jet on taxiway Charlie suddenly accelerated, veering off the pavement and plowing into a fuel depot. The resulting explosion sent a column of black smoke into the sky, a punctuation mark on the end of the world. The ASDX ground radar, which tracks every vehicle on the airfield. I watched the flashing icons of emergency services, fire, police, medical, converge on the downed 747 and the overrun security vehicle. Then, one by one, their transponders stopped moving. The icons froze, then winked out. Each one, a life, a crew, extinguished. Chloe had 3 news feeds up on the main monitor. The first reports were confused, contradictory. unprecedented riots at major airports, possible coordinated terrorist attack, hallucinogenic drug causing mass psychosis. The talking heads in the studios were just as lost as we were, trying to impose a familiar narrative on an event that defied all narrative. Then, a local news helicopter began broadcasting live footage from above our airport. The images were grainy, horrifying. The camera zoomed in on swarms of figures overwhelming the terminal gates, on scenes of unspeakable violence on the tarmac. The anchorwoman's voice faltered, stammered, then fell silent. Silent. The feed cut to a commercial for car insurance. The pilots still in the air were my responsibility, my flock, and they were flying blind into hell. They were begging for answers I didn't have. Tower, what is going on down there? Is it safe to land? We are low on fuel. We need to divert. I did the only thing I could. I became a machine of pure procedure. All aircraft, all stations, be advised, this airport is indefinitely closed. All runways are compromised. Do not attempt to land. I started issuing diversion instructions, rerouting dozens of planes to other airports. But my voice felt hollow. I was just pushing the problem down the line. Soon, reports started coming back from those other airports. Similar scenes, similar chaos. It wasn't just us. A pilot over downtown reported fires, gridlock, people running in the streets. It was like watching a virus spread in real time on a map, a red rash of madness consuming the world I once commanded. The final blow to normalcy came. From the International Emergency Frequency, the last bastion of aviation order. A pilot, his voice heavy with a German accent, flying a Lufthansa A380 over the North Atlantic, came on the air. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Lufthansa 645. We have an outbreak. In the cabin, we have bitten passengers. They are attacking others. We cannot maintain control. Then, silence. That was the moment I knew. The moment the full scale of it crashed down on me. The problem wasn't on the ground. It was in the sky with us. It was in the metal tubes I was supposed to be guiding. The flock was infected. And I, the shepherd, was trapped in my watchtower, watching the wolves overrun the world. The airport was a war zone. The distant sounds of sirens were replaced by a constant, horrifying chorus of screams. The power grid predictably flickered and died. The tower was plunged into a half-second of darkness before the backup generators in the basement roared to life, a deep, reassuring, the thrum that felt like the building's own heartbeat. The decision to stay was not immediate. It was a fierce, desperate debate. Ben was frantic, his eyes wide with terror. My family, my parents are just 20 miles from here. I have to go. We have to get out of here. He was already looking at the elevator, at the stairwell door, as if he could will himself through them. Marcus put a heavy hand on his shoulder. And go where, son? In it at? You wouldn't make it to the parking lot. We can't just sit here and die, Ben shot back, his voice cracking. It was then that I stepped in, my own fear suppressed by the cold, calculating logic that my job had drilled into me for years. He's right, Ben. Leaving is suicide, but we're not gonna die here. We're gonna survive here. I turned to the panoramic windows, which now felt less like a window and more like a tactical display. Look at our position. We are 300 feet up. The structure is reinforced concrete. There is a point of entry on the ground floor, a door that is electronically locked and made of reinforced steel. There is one stairwell, which we can control. The elevator requires a key card and a code, and we can disable it from this panel right here. I walked over to the elevator control and, with a flick of a switch, killed the power to the lift car. A red light blinked on the panel. One threat neutralized.
We have our own power. We have our own ventilation systems with biological and chemical filters. We have long-range communications. We have a 360-degree, unobstructed view of the entire battle space. This isn't a prison. It's a fortress. My voice was steady, confident. It was the same voice I used to talk a pilot through a landing in zero visibility. I was projecting a certainty I didn't entirely feel, but it was enough. Ben's panic subsided, replaced by a grim resolve. Chloe was already at a workstation, pulling up the tower's architectural schematics. He's right. The ground floor lobby
Bubby is a choke point. If we can secure that stairwell door, the only other way up is the elevator shaft itself. Marcus nodded, his pragmatism taking over. All right, let's do an inventory. Full resource assessment, now. The next hour was a blur of focused activity. We confirmed the ground floor stairwell door was locked and powered by the backup generator. We inventoried the emergency supply closet. Rations for 72 hours for a staff of 20. We had 4 people. That gave us more than a week. Cases of bottled water, a comprehensive first aid kit, 2 high-intensity flare guns with a dozen cartridges, and our most powerful asset, the technology that surrounded us. Radar systems that could track movement, a dozen security cameras, and radios that could reach halfway across the country. We were sealed in, prisoners in our own sanctuary. From our perch, we watched the last vestiges of the old world being torn apart. We saw planes, loaded with fleeing people, try to take off without tent clearance, only to be swarmed on the runway. We saw the desperate, futile last stands of the airport police. We watched the sun set on a world that was unrecognizable from the one it had risen on that morning. The panoramic glass that was my window to an ordered world was now my greatest asset and my greatest vulnerability. We could see them, the infected, shambling, running, an ocean of them, swarming over every inch of the tarmac. The age of aviation was over. The age of the long watch had begun. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in horror. But after the initial shock, a new instinct took over. The professional instinct, the controller's instinct. To observe, to understand, to find the pattern in the madness. We couldn't just watch the chaos, we had to analyze it. Our lives depended on it. They're drawn to noise, Marcus stated, pointing down at a swarm coalescing around a car with its alarm blaring. A simple observation, but it was the first piece of the puzzle. The first rule of the new world. I took it a step further. Not just noise. They're drawn to certain frequencies of noise. I pointed to our main audio sensor display. The car alarm is a high-pitched, intermittent sound. They react to it instantly. But the low hum of our generators, they don't seem to notice it at all. Chloe started a log. A digital whiteboard on one of the main screens titled Infected Behavioral Characteristics. Rule 1. Attracted to high-frequency, intermittent sound. We spent hours using the tower's cameras, zooming in, studying them. Their movements were erratic, but not random. In a resting state, they shambled, a slow, purposeless gait. But the introduction of a stimulus, a sound, a visual of prey, triggered a terrifying transformation. They would break into a spastic, unnervingly fast run. There's no self-preservation, Chloe noted, her voice clinical. Watch this one. She directed a camera to a lone infected near the main terminal. It was trying to get through. A revolving door, repeatedly smashing its head against the glass, oblivious to the damage it was causing itself. Rule 2. No discernible intelligence or self-preservation instinct. We used the Aztec's ground radar, a system so sensitive it can track a rabbit running across a runway to monitor their larger movements. What we saw was fascinating. They didn't move like a human crowd. They moved like a fluid, a tide. They would flow into an area, disperse, and then coalesce again around a new stimulus. It's like watching a murmuration of starlings, I murmured, captivated by the patterns on the screen. But wrong, Marcus grunted. They're not a herd. A herd has a leader, a direction. This is just hunger, pure, uncoordinated instinct. Ben, who had been quiet for hours, pointed to a screen showing thermal imaging from a security camera. Look at their heat signatures. They're cold, barely above ambient temperature. That was a critical piece of information. They weren't living, not in any biological sense we understood. They were engines of flesh, running on some unknown fuel, but they generated almost no heat. Rule third, low thermal signature, unaffected by weather. We tested our theories. Using the airport's external PA system, Marcus played a pre-recorded gate announcement in Terminal C. On the radar, we saw hundreds of red dots. Our new designation for the infected immediately changed direction and began flowing towards the sound. We had our first weapon, information. We were learning the rules of the enemy. We were turning our prison into a laboratory. From our sterile, air-conditioned perch, we dissected the apocalypse, trying to understand its anatomy, its language. Every observation, every new piece of data was a small victory, a tiny sliver of control wrested back from the all-consuming chaos below. In any hypothetical zombie pathogen scenario, the characteristics of the infected are paramount to developing a survival strategy. The narrator's observation, citations are remarkably astute. The attraction to specific auditory stimuli suggests the pathogen aggressively rewires the brain's sensory processing centers, creating a simple, reflexive seek and destroy loop. The lack of self-preservation is consistent with a total shutdown of the frontal lobe, the seat of reason and executive function. The pathogen isn't creating a new consciousness. It's hijacking the host's motor functions, turning the body into a biological weapon for its own propagation. The low thermal signature is perhaps the most interesting and terrifying aspect. It implies a radically different form of metabolism, one not based on the exothermic reactions that power warm-blooded life. This would make them incredibly resilient, unaffected by cold, and difficult to detect with conventional thermal imaging. From a strategic perspective, understanding the dynamics of the horde is key. The fluid, leaderless movement suggests they operate on a principle of emergent behavior. Each individual acts on a microcosmic level, independently, with the collective sole purpose. Individual infected is following a very simple set of rules. Move towards stimulus, attack non-infected. But when you have thousands of individuals following these same simple rules, you get complex, seemingly coordinated behavior on a macro scale. They are predictable, and if something is predictable, it is exploitable. On the second day, a new sound cut through the static of the emergency bands. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a warning. It was a voice, faint, desperate, and close. "Anyone hear me? We're trapped, under the terminal." I grabbed my headset, fine-tuning the frequency. "This is the control tower. I read you. Repeat your location." The voice came back, laced with a mixture of shock and suspicion. "The tower. You're still alive up there." "We're here," I confirmed, keeping my tone calm, professional. "Who am I speaking to?" "My name is Maria. I'm a baggage supervisor. I'm with 12 others. We're in the main conveyor sorting hub under Terminal B. We can hear them all around us, in the tunnels." My fingers flew across my keyboard, pulling up the schematics for the baggage handling system. A labyrinth of tunnels, conveyor belt, and maintenance corridors that ran for miles beneath the airport like a mechanical root system. They were in the heart of the beast. "Maria, I have the layout of the system in front of me. I can see you. Not literally, but I can see your location on the map." For the next hour, I didn't guide planes. I guided a conversation. I had to build trust. Maria was understandably terrified and suspicious. Who was this voice from the sky? Were we safe? Could we be trusted? I told her who we were, what we had seen. I shared our observations about the infected, the rules we had learned. I proved my worth by giving her actionable intelligence. Maria, there's a heavy concentration of them near the east end of your tunnel, by the baggage claim carousels for gate B12. I can see it on the motion sensors. But the maintenance corridor to the west, leading towards the old international terminal, seems clear. I could hear her relaying the information to her group, the muffled sounds of their fearful discussion. They were blind. They were surrounded by the sounds of the horde moving in the darkness above and around them. We were their only source of light, their only eyes. It was a terrible responsibility. Their lives were in my hands, hanging on the thread of a crackling radio signal. After what felt like an eternity, her voice came back, firm with a decision. "Okay, Tower. Okay, Alex. We trust you. The air is getting bad down here. We can't stay. Can you get us out?" I looked at Marcus. He gave a single, slow nod. The risks were enormous. A rescue attempt would be complex, noisy. It could draw unwanted attention to us. But we had no choice. We were controllers, and these were our people. Their call sign was Survivor 1, and I was about to attempt the most important and most dangerous piece of a puzzle.
Air traffic control of my life. The plan we formulated was audacious, a high-wire act of remote-controlled chaos. We couldn't just guide them out. We had to clear a path. We had to manipulate the horde, bend its behavior to our will. We had to become the ghost in the machine. The operation had 3 phases. Phase 1 was reconnaissance. For 2 hours, Chloe and I scoured every camera feed, every motion sensor log, every architectural schematic. We mapped a route from their location in the baggage hub to our target destination, the airport's main fire station, a reinforced concrete bunker on the far side of the airfield, equipped with its own power, water, and heavy-duty doors. The path was a minefield. It involved a quarter-mile sprint across an exposed service road. This was our primary tactical problem. Phase 2 was the distraction. This was Marcus's domain. He became a maestro of misdirection. "We're gonna pull 'em east," he said, his finger tracing a line on the digital map. "Hard east." The execution was brilliant. 10 minutes before Maria's group was set to move, Marcus activated the public address system in Terminal D at the extreme eastern edge of the airport. He didn't just play a sound. He played a recording of a panicked crowd, complete with screams and shouts. The effect was instantaneous. On the radar, we saw the red tide of infected signatures shift, flowing towards the source of the human noise. Then he layered it. He remotely triggered the baggage carousel at gate D9, adding a loud, grinding mechanical sound. He activated the flashing warning lights on a jet bridge. It was a symphony of deception, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to draw the attention of every infected individual within a square mile. And it was working. We were creating a corridor of relative safety for our survivors. Phase 3 was the guiding. This was on me. "Survivor 1, this is Tower. We are a go. The path is clear. You need to move now." My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding against my ribs. I was watching multiple screens at once, a schematic showing their position as a single blue dot, camera feeds of the service road they needed to cross, and the radar showing the bulk of the horde still distracted half a mile away. "Proceed west down Maintenance Corridor 4, I instructed, my eyes fixed on the screen. "The exit door is green. It will open onto the tarmac. You will be exposed. You must run. Do you copy?" Maria's voice was breathless. "We copy, Tower. We're moving." The next 5 minutes were the most intense of my life.
I watched the blue dot crawl across the schematic. I saw the green door swing open on the camera feed. I saw 13 figures emerge from the darkness, blinking in the daylight. "They're out," Ben shouted. "Now, Maria, now!" I urged into the mic. "Run north. Follow the blue taxiway line. Do not stop." They ran. A small, desperate group in the middle of a concrete wasteland. A few stray infected, not drawn away. I, by our distraction, turned towards them. "Faster, Maria," I commanded. It felt like I was trying to will them forward with my own voice. Just as the first of the infected closed in, they reached the fire station. We saw the heavy bay door roll open. One of her group must have been fire rescue, and they scrambled inside. The door rolled shut just as the infected began to pound against it. A chorus of cheers erupted in the control room. We had done it. We had taken on the apocalypse and won. We had used our knowledge, our tools, our minds, and we had saved 13 lives. It was the first moment of genuine hope, a bright, shining victory in a world that had seemed utterly consumed by darkness. What the narrator and his team accomplished is a textbook example of asymmetrical warfare, specifically using the principles of C4ISR: command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. They were physically weak, trapped in a tower, but they possessed a decisive advantage: superior information. They leveraged their surveillance and reconnaissance assets, the cameras, the radar, to gain a complete intelligence picture of the battle space. They used their command, control, and communication systems, the radios, the PA system, to direct their own assets, the survivors, and manipulate the enemy, the horde. The enemy was numerous and physically powerful, but it was also blind, deaf, and dumb. It could only react to immediate stimuli. The ATC team exploited this brilliantly. By creating a ghost stimulus, they were able to control the enemy's movement without ever firing a shot. This is the very essence of information warfare. It's not about destroying the enemy, it's about controlling them, making them go where you want them to go, making them do what you want them to do. In this new world, the most powerful weapon isn't a rifle. It's a radio. The victory was intoxicating. For the first time in 48 hours, the oppressive weight of despair lifted. We were laughing, congratulating each other. Ben was practically bouncing off the walls, his youthful energy restored. We had proven that we weren't just victims. We could fight back. We could win. But hope is a dangerous drug. It can breed overconfidence, hubris. The success of the rescue operation made Ben reckless. His desperation to find his family, which had been suppressed by fear, now resurfaced, amplified by our newfound sense of capability. "We could do it again," he said, his eyes gleaming as he looked at the map of the surrounding area. "We could guide people from the city, find my parents. We just need to get the word out." "Absolutely not," Marcus said, his voice a stern corrective. "We were lucky, Ben. We succeeded because it was a closed system. We control this airport. Out there," he gestured towards the smoke-hazed city on the horizon, "we have no eyes, no control. It's a different world." The argument simmered for hours. Ben saw our success as a template, a repeatable formula. Marcus saw it as a singular event, a risky gamble that had paid off but shouldn't be repeated. I found myself caught in the middle. My strategic mind agreed with Marcus. The variables outside the airport were too numerous, too unknown. But my heart ached for Ben. How could I deny him the hope that I now felt? The psychological toll of our confinement was beginning to show. We were operating on adrenaline and caffeine with almost no sleep. The constant exposure to the horror below, even from a distance, was corrosive. Chloe had retreated into her work, her log of infected behavior now pages long, a shield of data against the emotional reality. Marcus was becoming more authoritarian, his fear manifesting as rigid control. And I was fraying. I found myself staring at a small framed photo I kept at my workstation. My wife, Sarah, and our 7-year-old daughter, Lily. They were visiting her parents in another state when it happened. Are they safe? Did they get out of the city? Are they even alive? The thought was a physical weight, a cold stone in my chest. I had to compartmentalize, to push it down, just like I did when I was handling a dozen planes at once. Focus on the problem in front of you. Keep the system running. But now, the system was gone. All I had was the problem, the unanswerable, soul-crushing problem of my family. I understood Ben's desperation all too well. Hope and fear are two sides of the same coin. That night, I watched him as he sat by the windows, staring out at the distant, dark city, his face illuminated by the faint glow of burning buildings. And I saw the dangerous spark of an idea taking hold in his eyes. An idea born of hope, nurtured by hubris, and about to be executed with catastrophic foolishness. The mistake happened just after dawn on the third day, hour 49. I had finally drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep, slumped over my console. Marcus was on watch. But Marcus was human, and he had dozed off. Or a moment. That was all it took. Ben saw his opportunity. Driven by a toxic cocktail of guilt, grief, and our recent success, he went to a secondary communications panel. He didn't use the tightly controlled line-of-sight frequencies we used to talk to Maria. He used a broad-spectrum, high-powered transmitter capable of reaching hundreds of miles. He bypassed the protocols and sent his message out into the dead world. This is Ben Carter, broadcasting from the International Airport Tower. Is there anyone out there? I'm looking for my parents, David and Eleanor Carter, in the Northwood subdivision. Dad, Mom, if you can hear me, I'm alive, I'm safe. Please, if anyone hears this. His voice was a raw, desperate plea, full of a love so powerful it was suicidal. I was jolted awake by the sound of my own name being shouted. Alex, get up! Shut him down! Marcus was scrambling towards Ben, but it was too late. The message had gone out. A multi-second burst of powerful radio energy. A beacon of hope sent out into the darkness. And a dinner bell for everything in it. Marcus dragged Ben away from the console, his face a mask of cold fury. What did you do? What in God's name did you do? Ben was sobbing, collapsing in on himself. I had to know. The immediate aftermath was a chilling, unnatural silence. The world outside seemed to hold its breath. Nothing happened for the first minute, then 5. Maybe his broadcast hadn't reached anyone, living or dead. Maybe we were safe. Chloe shattered that hope. She was at the AS-DEX radar console, her face ashen. Oh no. She didn't need to say anything else. We all saw it. On the screen, which showed the movements of the infected across the entire airfield, a new pattern was emerging. The scattered, random flows of red dots were changing. Small groups, then larger ones, were stopping their shambling. They were turning. Like iron filings aligning to a powerful magnet, they were all turning to face us. From the east, from the west, from the parking garages, from the terminals, thousands of them. Their random movement ceased, replaced by a singular, unified purpose. They began to move towards the base of our tower, a slow, inexorable tide of red converging on our single, isolated position. Ben's broadcast hadn't just been a call for help, it was a declaration. A giant flashing neon sign that screamed, "We are here." It began with a sound, a soft, wet, scraping sound, amplified by the concrete base of the tower. The sound of fingernails on the glass of the ground floor lobby doors. Then a thud, then another. Then it became a constant, sickening drumbeat as more of them arrived, throwing their bodies against the reinforced entrance. We watched on the security cameras as the small atrium filled with them, a writhing mass of bodies pressing against the steel door to the stairwell. The glass on the outer doors spiderwebbed, then shattered inwards. They poured into the lobby, a flood of grasping hands and gnashing teeth. The noise grew, a hellish symphony of snarling, moaning, and the relentless, percussive impact of bodies against metal. "That door is rated to withstand a truck bomb," Marcus said, his voice tight, trying to reassure himself as much as us. "They can't get through it." But they didn't need to. They just needed to keep coming. They began to pile up, climbing on top of one another, a living ramp of flesh, their sheer numbers creating a pressure the structure was never designed to handle. Then came a new sound, a deep, rhythmic, metallic bang that echoed up the concrete stairwell. "What is that?" Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. I zoomed in a camera pointed at the service entrance behind the tower. One of them, a massive figure that must have been a cargo handler in its previous life, was swinging a heavy floor polisher like a battering ram against the steel fire door. It was a random act of spastic violence, but it was focused, and it was working. The hinges groaned. We heard the shriek of tortured metal, and then the door burst inwards. They were in the stairwell. The concrete shaft became a chimney of nightmares, channeling the sounds of their advance directly up to us. It was no longer a distant threat we could observe. It was immediate. It was inside, 30 floors below us and climbing. Our fortress had been breached. We had maybe an hour before they reached our door. Panic set in, pure, undiluted terror. Ben was curled into a ball, muttering apologies. Chloe was hyperventilating. Marcus was staring at the door to our control room as if he could hold it shut with his will alone. I forced myself to think, to function. "The fire suppression system," I yelled, the idea hitting me like a lightning strike. "The stairwell is on its own halon gas system. It was designed to extinguish a fire by displacing all the oxygen in the shaft. It wouldn't kill them, they weren't breathing, but it might rob their muscles of the oxygen they needed to function. It might slow them down." Marcus rushed to the panel, his hands flying across the controls. "Flooding the stairwell now!" We heard a deep hiss from under our door, and on the lower-level cameras we saw a thick, white gas pour into the shaft. The snarling and scrabbling from below subsided, replaced by an eerie quiet. For a moment, we thought it had worked. Then the banging began, not from below, but directly on our door. They had reached the top before the gas had fully deployed. They were here. We threw ourselves against the door, barricading it with heavy server racks, desks, anything we could move. The metal of the door began to dent inwards with each sickening impact. The glass of our panoramic windows, our beautiful eye on the world, now felt like the walls of a cage. We were trapped. The tide had reached our island, and it was about to wash us away. The barricade wouldn't hold. We all knew it. The rhythmic denting of the door was a death clock, counting down our final minutes. This was the end of the line, the final, unsolvable problem. My mind, trained to find order in chaos, was racing, cycling through impossible options. There was no way out, but a controller never gives up. You work the problem until it's solved or until you're a smoking hole in the ground. I scanned the airfield through the binoculars, my mind desperately searching for an answer, a variable I hadn't considered. And then I saw it, parked 50 yards from the base of our tower, forgotten in the chaos of the first day, a de-icing truck. It wasn't just a truck, it was a fortress on wheels, a heavy chassis, a reinforced cab, and a tank capable of holding 2,000 gallons of propylene glycol. It was our Ark. But it was on the other side of a sea of the dead. "Chloe, the emergency gear," I said, the nascent plan forming in my mind. "Is the rappelling equipment still in the locker?" Every tower was equipped with an emergency descent system for fires. She nodded, her eyes questioning. "Yes. 4 harnesses, 400 feet of line." "The truck," I said, pointing. "The de-icer. We rappel down." Marcus looked at me like I was insane. "Alex, have you lost your mind? Look down there. It's a carpet of them. We'd be torn apart before we unclipped from the rope." "Not if we split their attention," I countered, the plan crystallizing, the pieces clicking into place with cold, hard logic. I pointed to the west, towards the fuel depot that had been hit on the first day. "Remember the tanker that blew? It created a spill. Jet fuel has been pooling in that drainage ditch for 2 days. It's a giant fuel air bomb waiting to be lit." The calculus was brutal, insane. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only mission we had. "Here's the plan," I said, my voice taking on the clipped, authoritative tone of a controller handling an emergency. "Marcus, you, Chloe, and Ben will take the rappelling gear. You go down the north face of the tower, the side furthest from the main horde. I'll be in the tower's shadow. You move fast and you move quiet. Your only objective is that truck." "What about you?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "I'm the distraction. I go down the south face, the side facing the fuel spill. I'll be noisy, I'll be visible. I will draw every last one of them towards me. When I'm on the ground, I run for the ditch. That's your cue, Marcus. You get that truck started and you come for me." Ben, his face stained with tears of guilt, shook his head. "No, I'll do it. This is my fault. I'll be the distraction." I put my hand on his shoulder. "No, your job is to help Marcus and Chloe. Your job is to get to that truck and survive. That's how you make this right. My job is to see the big picture, and the picture says, this is the only way." There was no more debate. The groaning of the barricade was our imperative. We were no longer just survivors. We were a flight crew, preparing for a maneuver that had a 0% chance of success. We were writing a new rulebook, a new flight plan, in the last minutes before impact. The sound of the barricade giving way was a final, deafening shriek of tearing metal. We didn't have minutes anymore, we had seconds. Marcus and Chloe were already out the window on the north side, their dark forms starting a swift, silent descent. Ben followed, his movements clumsy with fear, but propelled by a desperate need for redemption. I stayed behind for a moment, watching them go. Then I turned to my window. I kicked out the glass, and the sound of the apocalypse rushed in, a wall of inhuman rage that filled the room. On the other side of the cabin, the first of the infected were spilling over the ruined barricade. I didn't hesitate. I clipped into my line and stepped out into the open air, 300 feet above the ground. My descent was the opposite of theirs. I was loud. I scraped my boots against the glass. I yelled. I made myself the most obvious, tantalizing target in the world. And they saw me. The collective consciousness of the horde, a million hungry eyes, turned upward. A guttural roar rose from the tarmac, a sound of pure, unified desire. The sea of bodies below began to shift, flowing towards the base of my rope. I was the bait, and I was working. The descent was a blur of wind, glass, and the terrifying mosaic of faces below. I risked a glance to the north. Marcus's team was almost down, swallowed by the deep shadow of the tower. They were going to make it to the truck. Now, I just had to survive long enough for them to start it. I hit the ground hard, my ankles screaming in protest. I unclipped from the rope in a single practiced motion, and I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The sound of thousands of them, a wet, shuffling, sprinting sound, was right behind me. I was a rabbit in a field of wolves. I focused on my target, the dark, shimmering pool of jet fuel in the drainage ditch 100 yards away. My lungs burned, my legs were lead. The snarling was so close I could feel it on the back of my neck. Just as I reached the edge of the ditch, I heard it. The sound I had been praying for. The deep, guttural roar of the de-icing truck's diesel engine turning over. Marcus had made it. The sound of the engine was a new stimulus, and for a half-second the horde was confused. The front line of my pursuers slowed, their heads turning towards the new noise. That was my window. I pulled the second flare gun from my belt, the one Marcus had insisted I take, aimed it not at the sky, but down, into the pool of fuel, and I fired. The world turned white. A concussive blast threw me backwards, the heat so intense it felt like it was peeling the skin from my face. A wall of fire erupted from the ditch, a massive, roaring inferno that vaporized the first 20 rows of the horde and sent a mushroom cloud of black smoke into the sky. The chaos was absolute. The infected were blinded, burning, disoriented. In that moment of blinding, apocalyptic fire, I scrambled to move, feet, and ran. I sprinted towards the sound of the moving truck, a lumbering yellow beast crashing through the chaos. The passenger door swung open. I didn't slow down. I dove headfirst into the cab as Marcus floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, crashing through the burning remnants of the horde, and sped away from our burning, overrun tower. As we cleared the perimeter, I looked back one last time. The tower, my sanctuary, my prison, my fortress of glass, was silhouetted against the fire, a dark tombstone marking the grave of the world that was. The silence in the cab of the de-icing truck was more deafening than the roar of the firestorm we had just escaped. It was the silence of shock, of survival, of profound and total loss. Ben was weeping quietly in the back. Chloe was staring straight ahead, her face a blank mask. Marcus was focused on driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was just trying to breathe. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving behind. In a deep, bone-aching exhaustion and a grief so vast it felt like a physical object lodged in my chest. We crashed through the airport's perimeter fence and onto a service road that led to the main highway. It was here that we saw the true scale of the collapse. It's one thing to watch the world end from a 300-foot tower like a god observing a tragedy. It's another thing to be on the ground, in the middle of it. The highway was a graveyard of abandoned cars stretching to the horizon in both directions. The city, which from the tower had been a collection of distant fires, was now revealed to be a smoldering ruin. We drove in silence for miles, navigating the wreckage. The first sign of other survivors was a roadblock, a hastily assembled barricade of cars and furniture. A group of men, armed with a motley collection of rifles and bats, stood guard. They weren't police, they weren't military, they were just people. And their eyes were filled with a fear that had curdled in to suspicion and hostility. Marcus slowed the truck. One of the men swaggered forward, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. He looked at our massive vehicle, then at us in the cab. "Keep moving," he snarled. "This is our road." There was no offer of help, no camaraderie of survival, just a territorial growl. We were not fellow survivors. We were a threat, a resource to be coveted or a competitor to be eliminated. This was the new reality. The infected were a force of nature, a mindless plague. But the real danger, the thinking, calculating danger, was the people who were left. The old rules, the social contracts, the shared humanity, it had all burned away in the fires of the last 72 hours. We were in a new world, one with no laws, no infrastructure, and no safety nets. A world where a stranger was more likely to be an enemy than a friend. We drove on, leaving the barricade behind, the silence in the cab now heavier than before. We had escaped the airport, but we had not found safety. We had just graduated to a larger, more complicated, and infinitely more dangerous battlefield. That night, we found refuge on a high, wooded bluff overlooking the dead city. We killed the engine and sat in the darkness, watching the fires burn below. For the first time, we had to think about what came next. Not just the next 5 minutes, but the next day, the next week. We needed a new flight plan. I looked at the faces of my crew, my fellow survivors, illuminated by the hellish glow of the city. Ben, still drowning in guilt. Chloe, her analytical mind struggling to process a world without data. Marcus, the veteran, looking tired and old for the first time. They were looking to me. I had guided them out of the tower. They expected me to guide them now. So I began to speak, not just to them, but to myself, codifying the lessons of the last 3 days into a new doctrine for survival. We survived because of what we knew, I started, my voice low. The rules of the tower. They still apply. They're more important than ever. Rule 1. Always see the bigger picture. In the tower, that meant watching the whole radar, not just one plane. Out here, it means getting to high ground. It means understanding the terrain, the flow of rivers, the layout of the roads. You don't focus on the single monster in front of you. You focus on the entire swarm, where it's going and why. You think 3 steps ahead, always. Rule 2. Control the flow. We use the PA system to pull the horde east. Out here, we can do the same thing. A car alarm, a thrown rock, a small fire. Use noise, light, and landscape to direct the threat. Don't fight the river. Build a dam. Divert its course. Make them go where you want them to go, not where they want to go. Rule 3. Write a new rule book. Every procedure I ever learned was useless by the second hour. The old world is gone. Its rules are dead. We have to be adaptable. We have to be willing to do things we never thought we could. Every single day will present a new problem that has no precedent. The only way to survive is to be smarter, faster, and more creative than the chaos. I paused, looking out at the ruins. A 4th rule came to me then, the most important one of all. Rule 4. Information is ammunition. Guns are useful, but knowledge is a weapon. Knowing that they're drawn to sound, knowing they have no thermal signature, knowing where to find water, knowing which roads are blocked. What we see, what we hear, what we learn, that is our greatest advantage. We have to stay observant. We have to communicate. We have to be the smartest things left in this world. This was our new protocol, our new checklist. It wasn't about managing aircraft anymore. It was about managing reality itself. It was the only way we were going to see the next sunrise. As the first hint of dawn began to break, painting the bottom of the smoke clouds in shades of gray and bruised purple, a profound silence fell over us. We had a plan, our new checklist. And a set of rules. We had a direction. For the first time since we'd left the tower. West, away from the dense populations of the coast, towards the open spaces where we could see things coming. Towards a new world we would have to build for ourselves. I got out of the truck and stood at the edge of the bluff. The air was cold and sharp with the smell of smoke. The city below was a vast, silent ruin, a monument to the fragility of everything we had once taken for granted. I looked up at the sky. For my entire adult life, this sky had been my workspace, a complex, 3-dimensional grid filled with invisible highways, intersections, and holding patterns. It had been filled with noise, with life, with purpose. Now it was empty. Utterly, completely empty. For the first time since I was a child,
There were no contrails, no blinking navigation lights, no distant roar of engines. The great machine was finally, truly silent. And in that silence, I felt two things at once. A deep, soul-crushing,
aching loss for the world we had lost, and a strange, terrifying sense of freedom. There were no more flight plans to file, no more schedules to keep, no more rules to follow but our own. We were truly on our own. A tiny, insignificant flicker of life in a world that had been scoured clean. The sun broke over the horizon, its light catching the dust and ash in the air, setting the world aglow. We were alive, for now. And as I turned back to the truck, to my crew, to the long, unknown road ahead, I knew one thing for certain. The job hadn't changed. I was still an air traffic controller. My job was still to take this small, precious vessel, filled with human souls, and guide it safely through the storm, towards a destination I could not yet see.